The true story of Thanksgiving. Faith, fear, and the fragile beginning of a nation. Every November, we picture that first Thanksgiving as a scene of perfect harmony. Pilgrims and Native Americans gathered around a long wooden table, the sun setting over golden fields, peace and gratitude filling the air. But that image, the one carved into school textbooks and holiday postcards, is only half the story. The true history of Thanksgiving is not just a story of gratitude. It is a story of struggle, desperation, conflict, and the fragile hope that somehow, after loss and fear, people could still find a way to share the same table. A harsh beginning. In the autumn of 1620, the Mayflower crossed the Atlantic. 102 passengers, battered by storms and disease. They weren't adventurers or conquerors. They were religious refugees, people seeking freedom to worship God in peace, far from the iron grip of the English crown and the Church of England. They landed not in the warm lands of Virginia, but on the cold, stony coast of Massachusetts, hundreds of miles off course, with winter closing in. They were ill-prepared, their food spoiled, their shelter inadequate. By spring, half of them were dead. Mothers buried children, husbands buried wives. The graves were unmarked, so that nearby tribes wouldn't know how weak the settlement had become. They had come seeking liberty and found death, hunger, and cold. That first winter wasn't a triumph. It was survival, barely. A fragile alliance. And then something happened. Something as miraculous as it was complicated. The surviving colonists met the Wampanoag people who had lived on that land for thousands of years. But the Wampanoag, too, were a people reeling from loss. A deadly epidemic, likely brought by earlier European contact, had decimated their villages only years before. Their population had been cut nearly in half. So when the Pilgrims arrived, both sides were wounded, cautious, and unsure. Out of that tension, an uneasy peace emerged. Chief Massasoit of the Wampanoag and Governor William Bradford of Plymouth Colony agreed to a treaty, not out of sentiment, but survival. Each needed the other. Massasoit sought allies against rival tribes. The Pilgrims needed food and knowledge of the land. And then came Squanto, a man whose life was itself a symbol of tragedy and resilience. Kidnapped by English sailors years before, sold into slavery, he had somehow made his way back to New England, only to find his village gone, wiped out by disease. He could have turned away. He could have sought vengeance. But instead, he became the bridge. He taught the Pilgrims to plant corn, to fertilize with fish, to find shellfish and berries. Without him, they would have perished. That fall, when both harvests succeeded, they gathered for a 3-day feast, not a national holiday, not a romantic tableau, but a moment of relief shared between two weary peoples who had both stared death in the face. It was not perfect harmony. It was fragile trust. And for a short time, it worked. The shadows that followed. But history, as it often does, grew darker. In the decades that followed, more English settlers came, thousands of them, pushing further into native lands. The old treaties faltered under the weight of expansion, greed, and fear. Tensions rose, and blood was shed. By 1675, only 50 years after that first shared meal, the land was at war. King Philip's War, one of the deadliest conflicts in early American history. The son of Massasoit fought against the descendants of those same Pilgrims, and the peace that had once held through trust and necessity was gone. The Thanksgiving story we celebrate today remembers the feast, but it forgets the cost. It forgets the hunger, the fear, the desperation that birthed it. It forgets that both peoples, settlers and natives, were fighting to survive in a world that neither fully understood the real meaning of Thanksgiving. But maybe that's why Thanksgiving matters so deeply. Because when you strip away the myth, what remains is still something sacred. Two worlds, both scarred, sitting down together, if only for a moment, and choosing peace over fear. It wasn't a celebration of conquest. It was a pause in the chaos, a recognition that even in hardship, gratitude can exist. That is the true legacy of Thanksgiving. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not innocence, but courage. Not abundance, but the faith that life can begin again, even after loss. So this Thanksgiving, let us give thanks not just for what is easy or beautiful, but for what is hard and honest. Let us remember that our nation's story began not with certainty, but with struggle, and that sometimes the truest gratitude is born not in comfort, but in survival. The Pilgrims and the Wampanoag both endured, both gave, both lost, and both, in their own way, helped shape the soul of a people who would one day call this land home. That is the Thanksgiving worth remembering, not the myth, but the miracle of mercy in a world divided. I hope you enjoyed this history, and happy Thanksgiving.